Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And then they have the Feast of Tabernacles, actually 7 days plus an 8th day of assembly. When you add those up, that turns out to be 70 appointed times. Why am I making a point of this? Well, if you take that term, Hamoyadim, and look at it as an equidistant letter sequence, that's a form of encryption. If you take an equidistant letter sequence, it's like, say, taking every third letter, every fourth letter, or whatever. It turns out if you turn a computer on the task and have it look at all possible sequences, the word Hamoyadim should statistically show up a number of times, but it shows up only once as an encryption. You'd expect, because just the statistic frequency of letters, that you'd expect that sequence to show up 5 different times. It shows up only once in the 78,000 letters that make up Genesis. Only once, and it's at an interval of 70. And it's centered on Genesis 1:14. Now, if you get into these things, that the likelihood of that being just a statistical accident is absurd. It's less. The odds have been estimated greater than 70 million to 1 for that to have occurred that way. It appears to be very intentional. So, the Hamoyadim. There's something. This is a testimony that the text. There's far more tucked away in this text than we have any ability to imagine. The Feasts of Israel is what we're going to deal with. These Hamoyadim, we're going to explore more carefully. There are 7 of them. The first 3 are in the spring. Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and the Feast of First Fruits. These all occur in 1 month, the first month of the religious year, called the month of Nisan. The next 3 feasts are in the fall. The fall 3 feasts are the Feast of Trumpets, the Feast of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, and the Feast of Tabernacles. So we have 3 in the first month, 3 in the 7th month, and there's 1 more, the Feast of Weeks, that we're going to deal with specially. So that's the 7 feasts of Moses. There are a couple of other feasts that are celebrated. Purim is celebrated in February typically, celebrating the events of the book of Esther, and the Feast of Hanukkah is celebrated roughly around our Christmas time. But they're not feasts of Moses. They both occurred much later. They're feasts of Israel, yes, but they're not feasts of Moses. We're really dealing with the Mosaic feasts here because they have a special issue here. In Leviticus 23, we have the details of these feasts mentioned, but these are the feasts of the Lord, even holy convocations, which ye shall proclaim in their seasons. The word feasts, by the way, that we use, is actually, as McGraw, it really means convocation, a calling together. It's a rehearsal. It's a rehearsal. And what's interesting about that term, it implies a preparation for the future. It's a rehearsal. In some sense, these feasts are not only celebrating a historical event, they're also anticipating a future fulfillment. Holy convocations, that's an appointed place, a meeting, an appointed sign or signal, moed. So we see in the very language in the Hebrew, it implies there's the anticipation towards the future. Now, a little background here. In Genesis chapter 1, all through chapter 1, the evening and the morning were the day one. The evening and the morning. It's always evening and morning. You ever wonder why? It's a very strange issue. The word evening in the Hebrew is erev. The word morning is boker. And the evening and the morning, these words, it's interesting, the 7th day does not have an evening or a morning recorded in Genesis. That should alert us to the fact that the term erev and boker came to mean evening and morning. They may have meant something else earlier. Erev actually refers to obscuration. It's something that's increasing entropy. When encroaching darkness began to deny the ability to discern forms, shapes, and identities. It's getting darker. It's getting harder to see. That is erev. Therefore, it suggests twilight, or the time of approaching darkness, is what the original conception here is. Sunset, making the duration of impurity, when a ceremonially unclean person became clean again in Leviticus 15. In other words, this becomes then the mark of the beginning of the Hebrew day. It's in the evening. We think of day beginning at midnight. That's a Western view. The Jewish view is that the day began at sunset. Strange, isn't it? The other word is boker. And what that word implies is becoming discernible, distinguishable, visible, perception of order, relief of obscurity. In other words, decreasing entropy. It dealt with the ability to begin to discern forms and shapes, distinct identities, breaking forth of light. You're getting up in the morning and the lights just begin, you're able to begin to see, discernment. So it refers to dawn or morning and is so used. And so let's take a look. In Genesis, we have the creation going on. In day one, randomness is at the bottom, order to the top. In other words, as I go up on this, I'm going from chaos to order. The bottom is randomness, the top is design or order. And Erev, obscurity, disorder, later comes to mean evening. Boker is orderly, discernible, meaning morning. So in day one, we have out of chaos the beginning of some structure. Let light be and so forth. And as we go, that's the first day. As we go through the 6 days of creation, each day we have a increase in order, a decrease in entropy, going from Erev to Boker. And we go day 3, same thing. Day 4 continues again. Day 5 continues again. We go Erev to Boker, and that's day 5. You go from Erev to Boker, and we have day 6. So it's a step-by-step creation going on. When we get to day 7, and Erev being darkness, Boker being light. We're going from confusion or disorder to order in those steps. So it's interesting, and incidentally, we're going to use that symbol in a subsequent chart to represent a day. But I want you to get used to the idea that the day starts at sunset. Okay, so now when we get to day 7, there is no Erev and Boker on the 7th day. Why? Because there was no creation going on then. God rested. He imposed a repose on the entire creation. And so now we're going to be dealing, the climax of all history, of course, is the final week of Christ with a triumphal entry through the resurrection, which is obviously recorded in all 4 Gospels. But one of the issues that we immediately confront as we start talking about these feasts and so forth, we discover by looking at the Bible carefully that almost everything we've been taught about the Easter week, as we might call it, is wrong. The church has for centuries assumed that the crucifixion took place on Friday. And there are many good scholars that still will defend that view. But is it Friday or Wednesday? Let's explore that a little bit. We know from John 12 that Jesus traveled from Jericho to Bethany 6 days before Passover. Well, that would require more than a Sabbath day's journey if Passover is on a Friday. I'll show you that in a minute in our chart. Jesus also specified there would be 3 days and 3 nights. Those are his words between the crucifixion and resurrection. You can't get 3 days and 3 nights between Friday and Sunday. I have fond memories of being on TBN with a co-host, and our guest at that time was the famous apologist, John Warwick Montgomery. And my co-host got in a discussion with him about Friday or Wednesday, and Dr. Montgomery defended the Friday traditional view. And there's by counting partial days and so forth. When he finished his little thing, I turned to my co-host with 35 million households watching television and said, you have to realize that Dr. Montgomery is an attorney, and that's the way they bill. And John almost fell off the couch laughing. The first time I'd actually met him, but I felt I knew him very well because he's such a close friend of Walter Martin. So we took some liberties there, and he all was just good-natured kidding. But there are good scholars that do defend Friday. But there are 3 issues here. The other one is there are 2 Sabbaths between Passover and Sunday morning. I'll show you that too. So all 3 of these things put together suggest strongly that Jesus could not have been crucified on a Friday. That's the point of all this. And in Matthew 28, verse 1, your English Bible says, when the Sabbath was passed. That's a mistranslation. If you look at the root text that many Bibles will be footnoted in, is the word of Sabbaton, which means it's a plural noun, that there are 2 Sabbaths at least. There's a plurality of Sabbaths between Passover and that Sunday morning. But so the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is one of the 7 high Sabbaths each year, intervened between Passover and Shabbat. So let's take a look at this. This is a little sketch, if I may, of the 14th, the Passover, which is the